Hello and welcome to the Boxing Insider. This week we'll be asking, where has it all gone wrong for Anthony Joshua?
George Foreman said it best, decide what you want to be and be it. And he's a big, bruising, aggressive heavyweight, and that's what he needs to be.
But I do feel like maybe AJ lost a little bit of his mojo because of essentially what was almost like a life and death situation. If you go back to the 2017 fight of the year against Vladimir Klitschko.
I think Joshua is a spent force. I think that Joshua a few years ago, we'll never see again. I think he's gun shy.
We are still waiting to find out exactly what is going on at the top of the heavyweight division. But one question does still remain. What has gone wrong for Anthony Joshua? At the start of 2019, he had the world at his feet. Adored by the public, he filled out every UK stadium he stepped inside, knocking out all but one of the opponents that dared step inside the ring with him. And he had 3 world titles to his name. Then, at the start of that year, he decided to take on America and try and crack it. Let's not forget, he was due to take on Jarrell Miller, but at late notice, he was left searching for a new opponent. One man took that opportunity with both hands, and that man was Andy Ruiz Jr.
I don't think he looked right in the build-up that week. Joshua thought he'd finished him early, and he took his eye off the ball in that fight, and he got caught. And Ruiz, who's got fast hands, took his opportunity that night. For him, it was the lottery ticket fight, and he's a tough kid who's been fighting people bigger than himself for a long time and knew how to handle himself, and he was quite experienced. What went wrong? Joshua was out on his feet. I don't think he showed real quit in himself. I watched it back, and he was really kind of trying to find. It was an incredibly exciting fight. It took all our adrenaline away. The adrenaline dump was incredible. But he found a new level in himself when he came back. Yes, he was much more cautious after that fight. And I think that's what we've seen from him. He suffered a first defeat in a very humiliating way against an opponent nobody expected to beat him. And I think it affected him, and I think it still affected him.
But were there already signs before that fight at Madison Square Garden that suggested there were chinks in AJ's armour?
I do feel like maybe AJ lost a little bit of his mojo because of essentially what was almost like a life and death situation. If you go back to the 2017 fight of the year against Vladimir Klitschko, when he got almost within a whisker of getting, not just losing the titles, but getting knocked out, when Klitschko dropped him. And of course, he came back in dramatic fashion, exciting fashion, and he won that fight and sent the great Vladimir Klitschko into retirement. And again, I have full respect for AJ. I'm a fan of his. I came to London to cover that fight against Klitschko. I have to say that if that fight was just a little bit earlier on, a couple of years earlier, when Klitschko wasn't, 40 plus, when Klitschko wasn't coming off of a long, long layoff, that, he probably would have finished Anthony Joshua in that situation. But the point is, I don't know if he's ever had the full confidence in himself since that near death, quote unquote, experience against Klitschko.
The world of sport, let alone boxing, was stunned by what we witnessed that night at Madison Square Garden. But give AJ credit, he didn't make any excuses, and that's despite numerous conspiracy theories doing the rounds at the time. One of those involved AJ apparently suffering a panic attack in the dressing room before the fight. The other, he got knocked out in sparring in the build-up. He looked to make amends straight away though. He took on a rematch immediately against Ruiz Jr., a fight which took place in Saudi Arabia in December of that year.
To go into the immediate rematch, I'm speaking now as an ex-fighter, so I know how difficult this is. When they go into immediate rematches and a fighter's taken that much of a beating in the first fight, that's very hard to overcome. Spotlight comes on, ring walks come on, things come flashing back in your head. You've got all that going on in your head. So you've got all the demons to compete with, as well as the opponent in front of you who's gone from being a contender to champion. So when you're a contender, you're here. When you're champion, it elevates you to another level. You perform at another level. I think Andy Ruiz maybe didn't train as well as he should have. That's one of the points, because he come in the ring, he was overweight or whatever else, but he was still dangerous and he was still the champion. AJ's got all these demons to deal with. He goes in there and he says, right, if I stand with this geezer and he tags me, I'm going to get done. So I'm going, the only way AJ can win this fight is by keeping it long for 12 rounds. He won't be able to keep it long for 12 rounds. The stamina won't allow him to keep it long for 12 rounds, because that's a lot of movement for a guy of that muscle bulk, that size, like 17 and a half stone or 17.1 or whatever he was then. But I like that. That's a difficult thing. So if you put all those things into place, you go, that's a masterclass, mate. You haven't gone in there. He hasn't gone in there. That's not like the first fight they've had. He's coming off a knockout. Trust me, as a fighter, I know that's not an easy thing to deal with.
For me, I thought he fought a brilliant fight against Andy Ruiz. He did exactly what he needed to do. There's the old saying, win tonight, look good tomorrow. And that was what he did. He won the fight. He didn't look good necessarily. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't, a great, memorable event. It was a memorable event, I suppose, because of going to Saudi Arabia, but it wasn't a great, memorable fight. But he did what he needed to do to make sure that he didn't lose the second time, that he regained those titles and move forward with his career. So I thought that McCracken came up with a great plan for that fight. I thought AJ did a great job of implementing that plan, because it's one thing for you to have a coach to give you all the right information. It's a totally different plan for you as the athlete to be able to execute it. And not only execute it, but Joshua was able to execute it rounds 1 through 12. He didn't deviate. He didn't get unfocused. Maybe some guys could put that kind of box and move plan in for 3, 4, 5 rounds. Joshua did it 1 through 12 and did a brilliant job and won essentially every round, and certainly was aided by the fact that Andy Ruiz, came into that fight in absolutely terrible condition, did not have his mind or body involved, as far as being motivated for that. I don't understand why he did that, but he had spent way too much time partying and celebrating the win and was in no shape mentally or physically to have the rematch. But nonetheless, Joshua did his job.
With Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder tied up in what ended up being a trilogy, and the COVID pandemic hitting the world shortly after, Anthony Joshua was forced into taking a mandatory defence against IBF challenger Kubrat Pulev. This took place in December 2020 at Wembley Arena, only around 1,000 fans there to witness what was a 9th round stoppage for AJ. However, were there any red flags that night which suggested even more bumps ahead for AJ in the years to follow? Well, Spencer Oliver doesn't think so.
And I text Joshua after that fight, actually. He said, listen, Pulev, you had him gone there in the 3rd round. You had him gone, Josh. Why didn't you jump on him? And he said, Spence, I'd learned from my mistakes from the first fight with Ruiz. He said, and I felt that he wasn't just ready to go, so I just wanted to get back on the boxing, and systematically break him down until the time was right. So that he showed that he's, still developing as a fighter. And I thought it was a great performance against Pulev. I thought he showed us again that he had that spike back in him, but he also mixed that with the boxing that he'd learned.
It did look like at one point we would get a fight between Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury for the crown of being the undisputed heavyweight world champion. However, as we know, the Gypsy King was forced into that 3rd fight against Deontay Wilder, and so AJ willingly took on the challenge of taking on former undisputed cruiserweight king Alexander Usyk. And we know how that panned out.
Yeah, I think he allowed Alexander Usyk to outbox him. And he shouldn't have boxed him. He should have put pressure on him, should have walked him down, should have pushed him into the corners, leaned on him, tied him up, tried to hit him hard when there were more opportunities. And I think he looked gun shy against him, because he was popped early on by punches and angles he didn't see coming, and he let Usyk develop a rhythm in the fight. Instead of pushing out the jab, and they were both exhausted by the end of the fight. And Anthony Joshua looked in trouble at the end of it.
The Usyk fight, I think they got wrong tactically, and I think it showed holes in his game, and it showed holes maybe in his mindset. I don't think his mind was particularly great. His mindset wasn't right before the Usyk fight. He was asking for advice on the way to the ring. The job should be all. The job's all done by the time you get in the ring. You just got to play it out, what you've been working on for months in the gym. So the rematch I anticipate will be entirely different. So it's one that I'm looking forward to, because I'm not sure we'll get a different result, but we're going to get a different fight.
So where does AJ go from here, and what changes does he need to make to become a world champion once more? Or is it simply too late?
I think Joshua is a spent force. I think the Joshua of a few years ago we'll never see again. I think he's gun shy. I think that was proved against Pulev. If you remember, I think it was the 4th or the 5th round, he had Pulev all over the place. And the bell went. And the next round, instead of going in to finish the job, what did he do? He stood off him. And it went another 4 or 5 rounds, which he shouldn't have done. So, there's a flaw in Mr. Joshua at the moment, in my opinion. I think if Usyk fights him again, he will beat him again. And that will mean we will never see Joshua and Fury.
So, what do the rest of our panel think?
Yeah, I think we will see a more safety first Anthony Joshua, but I think that's what we need to see. If he's going to regain these belts, I do not. People say he needs to take the ambitious and positive and aggressive approach against Anthony Joshua. I think that's all wrong. I think that's what he needs at all. I think that will make it come unstuck. So I'm not his coaching team, and they will devise a plan for him. But I personally think we need to see him more gun shy. Anthony Joshua. He's got great power, he's got great speed, he's very fit, he's very strong, and he will beat, I believe, everyone bar 2 heavyweights out there. I think Usyk is all wrong for him. So I think any game plan he uses against this man, he will not beat him. So for me, Anthony Joshua has a box on the back foot, using a good jab and his great feet and his superior fitness, that he gained through years of hard work. I think that's the way to go. I just don't think he beats Alexander Usyk, whatever he does.
I think he's come under a lot of scrutiny, and I think he's questioning himself at the moment. I think he's been questioning himself since September. Felt anger about his own performance. We've seen that at points when he's done interviews, expressing, the fact that he wanted to outbox the boxer. George Foreman said it best: decide what you want to be and be it. And he's a big, bruising, aggressive heavyweight, and that's what he needs to be. Yes, of course he's finessing his style and all those things, but go in there and hit people with your heavy hands, challenge them, push them back on the ropes, be aggressive, use a big booming jab, but let your hands go. Where are the combinations coming at the moment? There aren't combinations. We didn't see combinations against Usyk. That's what we need to see from Anthony Joshua.
I sometimes think, James, that people sometimes make a little bit too much of a loss. And, because we're in the middle of his career. We don't have the opportunity to look back. And I say that to you because I was just thinking a couple of days ago was the anniversary of when George Foreman knocked out Joe Frazier to win the heavyweight title. Joe Frazier had beaten Muhammad Ali. He was the heavyweight champ. He had made a couple of defenses, and he goes in the ring as the favorite, I might add, against the big, strong, but lumbering George Foreman. And Frazier's supposed to beat the guy. And not only does George win the fight, he beats the living crap out of Joe Frazier, destroys him, drops him numerous times, stops him in the second round. Now, at that time, you're like, oh my God, Frazier is exposed. He's got nothing. Well, you look back now, 49 years later, and Joe Frazier is regarded as one of the greatest heavyweights ever. He had a horrible night and a bad game plan against George Foreman. And I think maybe when we look back on Joshua's career, or as we have done maybe on Lennox Lewis's career, when he was in the throes of it and got knocked out by Oliver McCall, or later got knocked out by Rockman, people talk about how he's not as good as we think he is, or he was exposed. Well, now that he's been retired for a long time, we look back and we say Lennox Lewis is one of the greatest heavyweights that ever put gloves on. And so I always try to think to myself, not to get too caught up in the emotion of what's happening right this minute with the minutia of this fight. What's he doing in that fight? What's he doing here? What's he doing there? That you have to take the guy's career in totality. And Joshua's career is still a work in progress. And I think that when it's all said and done, he's going to have had some bumps along the way, the same way Lennox Lewis did and Joe Frazier did against George Foreman. But ultimately, he's going to come out the other side, and we're going to see that he was, in fact, one of the top heavyweights of this era.
So why has it all gone wrong for Anthony Joshua? Well, I don't think we'll ever truly know what actually happened and what caused that shock defeat to Andy Ruiz Jr. I guess every fighter is allowed an off night, and all of the greats have suffered one defeat or more in their time. He deserves credit for taking on the immediate rematch and beating Andy Ruiz Jr., albeit an out of sorts Andy Ruiz Jr., and willingly taking on the challenge of the undisputed cruiserweight king, Alexander Usyk. However, he got it so wrong that night. And yes, he is now making changes behind the scenes to rectify some of the issues he had in that fight. Fans want him to be devastating and explosive like we saw him at the start of his career as he climbed the ladder and became a world champion. But whether or not he can build up that boxing IQ to rival that of Fury and Usyk, I think it's going to be a really tough ask. Don't forget to check out our interviews in full and let us know what you think. Why has it all gone wrong for Anthony Joshua? And what does he need to do to put it right? We'll be back with another episode of The Boxing Insider next week. But in the meantime, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our boxing content across the talkSPORT network.